Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is the criminal justice system in the United States, and we're fortunate to have with us to talk about the criminal justice system in the United States, Dr. DBurris-Kitchens from Tennessee State University in the Department of Criminal Justice at that institution. And of course, Dr. Burris-Kitchens, let me welcome you to the show this morning.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And to tell you how delighted we are to have you here. As a matter of fact, to talk about a topic that we consider to be very, very important in terms of our understanding, in a real sense, of exactly how people are judged and eventually incarcerated, and some of the impacts that this has upon society and upon different groups and etc. But before we get into a discussion of the criminal justice system in the United States, Dr. Burris-Kitchens, let's see if we can have you to talk about yourself, to give us some information about your background, your education, and some of the things that were important in terms of eventually bringing you to us this morning, and after which we'll have an opportunity to talk about this criminal justice system in the United States.
Sure. I'm originally from Indianapolis, Indiana, and I did my undergraduate degree in sociology at the Indiana University in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And while I was there, I ran across a couple of professors that got me very passionate about the issue of criminal justice in America, and specifically some of the disparities that exist within the criminal justice system across racial and social class lines. So I continued to study. I went up to Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana, to get my master's degree in sociology, and eventually finished up at Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo with my doctorate in sociology. I went from there to the University of Laverne in California, Southern California, and there I got specifically interested in racial disparities in sentencing because I got to tour with Jesse Jackson when he went on his presidential campaign back in the middle 90s, and that's what he specifically wanted me to address, were racial disparities in sentencing. So my research interests have been focused on that pretty much since. And then I came to Tennessee State University in 2001 as a faculty member, and eventually was put in the position of department head in 2006, where I've been ever since, and have still been doing my research on racial disparities in sentencing. So I've been researching this topic for probably 10 or 12 years now.
And I'm sure you'll have a lot of additional information to give to us in reference to this.
Right.
Let's look at the criminal justice system. When I say the criminal justice system in the United States, exactly what am I saying? And from your perspective, what are we talking about?
We're talking about three aspects of the criminal justice system, being policing, the courts, and corrections. The policing basically focuses on looking for people who are committing violations against our legal code, and the courts are who prosecute those who are accused, and then the corrections are the people who are responsible for taking care of those who are sentenced in the criminal justice system. Where the disparities lie, I think, is from the courts into the sentencing aspect, and then into incarceration. We've also got probation and parole. Parole is where they come out of the system. Probation is where they basically are at the front end. They're given probation as opposed to being sentenced to the prison system when they're convicted of a particular offense. Our legal system came basically from the English common laws. So we're still a system that looks a lot like what was brought over by the English when they came to the United States.
And so the whole aspect of the criminal justice system in the United States is really an extension almost of the English system.
Right. And when we get to that part of the discussion, that's going to play a big role in why the system looks like it does, as far as it being somewhat discriminatory against different racial groups in our society.
And that will be one aspect of it. Very good. You know, I think that you mentioned policing is a very, very important aspect of that. Now, we've heard quite a number of people complain quite recently about what they call police brutality. I don't think that it is as prevalent really today as it has been, I think, in the past. But is that a real issue today in criminal justice system, the criminal justice system?
There's a lot more control over what goes on with law enforcement officers because they have cameras in their cars now and they're constantly being watched. There's a lot more surveillance than there ever used to be for police officers, but I still think that there is some police brutality that goes on. And one of the projects that I worked on out in Southern California was related to police brutality, and they actually had a book that was published. It's called October 22nd, where they published all the different people who were actually killed by the police.
Very good. And of course, Dr., let's stop at this junction for our first commercial break. And of course, we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. The show for today, we're talking to Dr. DBurris-Kitchens from Tennessee State University, and the topic is the criminal justice system of the United States. And of course, Dr. Kitchens, before we had our first commercial break, we promised that we'd give you an opportunity to continue to talk about what I think you've indicated is what we call police brutality. So let's pick up at that point and talk about it.
Well, as I was saying, they had a publication and a march called October 22nd out in Southern California, where people would protest actual police brutality cases. And they published a book that was literally this thick every year to talk about people who had been shot by police. And these were not cases where the person was challenging the police officer or threatening the police officer. They were cases where the person did not have a weapon, the person's back was to a police officer. Obviously, they were not threatening the police officer in any way, and they should not have used that type of excessive force. So that's why I wanted to talk about that, is because I think that there's still some obvious problems. If you have a group that can come up with that many people who've been victims of that type of crime every year and protest, literally hundreds of thousands protest this on October 22nd, then it's a problem. I wanted to kind of go back to the legal code and how it came out of European history, because I think that's going to lead up to our final discussion as far as racial disparities, because you talked about that just a little bit. When we talk about coming out of the legal code, the first laws that were written were basically to protect property rights owners in the United States, and those property rights owners were European Americans. So excluded from protection from the legal code were obviously Native Americans, African Americans who were brought here and were not U.S. citizens or United States citizens. And because of that, the laws that were written to protect property rights were usually written as repressive laws against those who didn't have access to ownership of property, whether it was Native Americans or whether it was people who were brought here from Africa against their will. Because of that legislation, people of color were criminalized very early in our history and continued to be criminalized throughout American history up until the 1865 13th Amendment of abolishing slavery was passed. And once they abolished slavery, they put in that with exclusion of, okay, slavery is abolished, but with exclusion of those who have been convicted of a felony offense, and slavery could be used in order as a form of a punishment. So they still use that part of that legislation to enslave predominantly African-American people who were convicted of crimes that they did not get their due process for. So it would go into the court, and of course they would not get a jury. If they did, they certainly didn't get a jury, their peers, and it was one person's word against another, and of course the white person's word was the word of the law, so the person of color was convicted of a particular crime and probably put right back on the plantation that they were freed from a few years prior.
Now, would this be something similar to what you call the chain gang system, that many of these individuals had somehow gone against the law, but it might not be illegal in terms of what they did, but in the end they would be placed back into a situation where they were basically enslaved once again?
Absolutely.
Is that the so-called chain gang system? Is that
yes, that would be part of the chain gang system. Many of the people were put right back on the slave property that they were on prior to being freed from the 1865 legislation. So absolutely. And then of course we had in our legal code that sever but equal. Plessy versus Ferguson was saying also that it was illegal for an African American to go into white establishments or